You've entered Ghosts of Asia, where forgotten spirits walk among concrete shadows, and the dead still wait behind locked doors. Tonight, we follow quiet footsteps down a corridor that should have ended long ago, but it keeps growing, stretching, breathing. A hallway built not for the living, but for those we've left behind. In this haunted tale, we meet Aya, a nurse worn thin by night shifts and fading prayers. She comes home each night to a hallway that grows longer, darker, revealing doors that should not exist, rooms that were never built, and whispers that call her by name at 3:13 a.m. This is not a story about death. It is a story about what waits after we stop noticing. About cities that bury their ghosts in fluorescent light and peeling paint. And about one woman who dares to open the final door, even when no one else remembers it was ever there. Aya didn't remember when her apartment stopped feeling like home. It had been months since she first noticed the strange hollowness in the air, like something had been removed, not a physical object, but something quieter. A breath, a prayer, a warmth that used to greet her when she came back from work. But that night, like every other, she blamed it on exhaustion. The hospital had drained her. Again. She stepped off the elevator onto the 7th floor of the Enon complex, an aging concrete building near the river where few people smiled and fewer made eye contact. It was a quiet building, too quiet for a place still filled with the living. Her shoes made soft taps against the cold hallway floor, echoes bouncing off the walls a beat too late. There were 7 doors on her floor, always 7. She knew their colors, their chipped paint, the way the gold numbers dulled in the flickering hallway light. She passed them in a rhythm she could walk with her eyes closed. But tonight, something was off. She paused outside her door, Unit 702, and turned to glance back. The corridor felt longer. Not drastically, not enough to measure, but the end, where the concrete wall used to wait, felt further than before. A few feet, maybe? Enough to unsettle something in her chest. Her eyes swept left, right. Same pale yellow light, same flickering bulb above door 705, same smell of damp concrete and old incense. Still, longer. She shook her head. "You're tired, Aya," she whispered. She unlocked her door, stepped inside, and locked it again out of habit. The lock gave a soft metallic click. Behind it, her tiny apartment sat untouched, shoes neatly arranged, a few dishes drying, a rosary hung above the threshold where her mother insisted it should stay, even if Aya hadn't prayed in years. She dropped her bag beside the sofa and rubbed her eyes. She hadn't eaten since her shift started, but the thought of food turned her stomach. Instead, she sat down and stared at the wall for a few minutes too long, until the ticking of the old plastic clock reminded her that time was still moving, that she hadn't. She didn't shower that night. She just changed into the loose gray shirt she wore to sleep and pulled the blanket over her shoulder on the couch. The bed felt too far. The hallway inside her apartment somehow also felt longer. Sleep came quickly, but not gently. At 3:13 a.m., Aya opened her eyes. She didn't know why. No dream startled her, no sound jolted her awake, but her heart was racing. Her mouth was dry. Her fingers curled the edge of the blanket as if bracing for something she couldn't see. A soft sound trickled into her ears, like footsteps. Not heavy, not rushing, just slow, measured. She sat up. The footsteps weren't in her apartment. They were outside, in the hallway. She listened. One step, then another, then silence. A creak, then silence again. Her pulse drummed. She told herself it was probably someone from another floor, or maybe a neighbor coming home late. Nothing strange. But no one ever came home this late on her floor. She stood slowly, padded barefoot to her door, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the pale light and a long, empty corridor. Too long. She pressed her forehead to the wood, breathing lightly. Then, down the hallway, she saw something move. A shadow, brief and low, crossing just outside her view, like someone had passed, but too close to the ground. She stepped back from the door. The rosary above the threshold trembled slightly. Aya stared at it. She hadn't touched it. It continued to sway for a few seconds more before falling still. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came reluctantly. The next day at work, Aya washed blood off her hands more times than she could count. Her body moved, but her thoughts lagged, slipping back to the sound of footsteps and the hallway that stretched further than it should. When the clock struck 6 p.m., she left in silence. Her coworker men asked if she wanted to grab noodles. She said no, without looking him in the eyes. The train ride home was hollow. She didn't listen to music, she didn't check her phone. Something deep in her bones buzzed, like a warning she couldn't translate. When she stepped into the elevator at Thienon Complex and pressed the button for the 7th floor, the lights flickered. "Not tonight," she whispered. The doors opened with a groan. She stepped out, then froze. There were 8 doors on her floor. Not 7. 8. The corridor was longer, undeniably, and at the far end, a new door stood, fresh beige paint, a gold number, 708. Aya stared. Her mind raced. She counted again, hers included. That made 7. Now there was one more. The air pressed against her skin like damp cloth. Her chest tightened. She walked slowly past each familiar door, heart knocking in her ribs. When she reached the new door, 708, she reached out and touched the wood. It was cold, colder than it should be. There was no doormat, no potted plant, no sign of life. She looked around. No one was in the corridor. Aya stepped back, and for the first time in her adult life, she whispered a short prayer under her breath. Then she turned around, unlocked her own door, and shut herself inside, locking the bolt, the chain, and pressing her back against the wood. From the other side, she heard a soft knock. Once, then silence, then a long, slow drag of something heavy across the tile. She didn't sleep that night either. And when she checked the building registry the next morning, there was no record of Unit 708. It didn't exist. But the door was still there, and the hallway, it had grown again. Aya stood in front of the building registry as if she were staring at a ghost. There was no Unit 708. No recent renovation notices, no temporary listings, no complaints, signatures, or recorded tenants. The building database, printed, yellowing, kept behind a scratched glass panel in the lobby, showed only 7 units on her floor, just as it always had, just as she remembered. Yet the hallway did not agree. When she returned from the lobby, the elevator doors sliding open with a metallic exhale, the 8th door waited at the far end of the corridor as if it had always belonged there. Tall, narrow, quiet. Its beige paint looked wrong in the washed-out fluorescent light, as though the building had grown a new limb overnight, a part of something dead still forcing itself to live. Aya stepped out of the elevator slowly, almost unwillingly, as though the act of moving closer to that new door meant acknowledging something her mind wasn't ready to accept. The hallway stretched out before her, longer than yesterday, longer than this morning. How long had it been growing? A few inches a day? A foot a night? Or had it been waiting for the right moment to reveal its true shape? The air was heavy, thick with a dampness that reminded her of hospital storage rooms where unused beds were kept under sheets, a place where silence was supposed to live. Her keys shook between her fingers. She forced her steps forward, passing 703, 704, 705, and each door seemed slightly farther apart, as if the building were quietly pushing them outward, expanding its ribs around her. When she reached 707, she paused, then lifted her gaze toward the new door. 708. The number was wrong. Not just because it shouldn't exist, but because it looked fresh, too fresh, like it had been installed minutes ago. A thin streak of paint dripped from the number 8, as though the gold plating had been applied in a hurry. She approached it step by step. Her pulse echoed in her ears. Something moved behind the door. She froze mid-step. Not footsteps, not breathing. A shift, like fabric brushing against the floor, a slow, dragging motion. Aya took a step closer. The corridor exhaled around her, the lights dimming for a second. Then the doorknob twitched, a single metallic click. She stumbled backward, heart slamming into her ribs. "Hello?" she whispered, instantly regretting it. Her voice sounded thin, swallowed by the stale air. No answer came from behind the door, but she felt, no, sensed, someone standing just inches from the other side, listening, waiting, breathing in the cold stillness. She stepped back again until her shoulder met the front of her own apartment door. Unit 702. Home, whatever that meant anymore. A prickling swept across her scalp as though invisible fingers brushed her hairline. She fumbled for her keys, dropped them, cursed under her breath, picked them up again with trembling hands. Behind her, the doorknob of 708 trembled once more, just a soft, metallic vibration, like a suppressed movement. She hurriedly unlocked her door, slipped inside, shut it, locked it again with the chain, pressing her back to the wood as if expecting it to bow inward under invisible weight. But the hallway remained silent. There were no footsteps, no dragging noises, no knocks. Silence, deep and unnatural, fell like a blanket over her floor. She didn't plan to investigate. She really didn't. But exhaustion had a way of dissolving fear. By the next morning, Aya convinced herself it might have been a mistake, a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by too many night shifts. She had seen nurses collapse at work for less. "Maybe the registry is wrong," she murmured to herself as she tied her hair for her shift. "Maybe they added a new unit. Maybe the hallway always had 8 doors." The lies sounded reasonable if she didn't think too hard about them. When she stepped into the corridor again, she forced herself to count each door calmly, like a nurse counting medicine doses. 702, 703, 704, 705, 706, 707, 708. Her stomach dropped. No mistake. And today, something else had changed. A small offering bowl, a white ceramic cup, sat on the ground directly in front of door 708. The cup was filled with cold black tea, a few wilted chrysanthemum petals floating on the surface. Aya crouched. The cup was old, chipped at the rim, but clean. Someone had placed it carefully. A ritual cup. A mourning cup. Her breath caught. Someone had made an offering. To what? Or to whom? The elevator dinged behind her, startling her. She flinched and almost knocked the offering over. A man stepped out, a neighbor she'd glimpsed a few times, middle-aged, worn face, carrying a bag of groceries. He froze when he saw her crouched next to the cup. "You see it too?" he asked quietly. Aya straightened. "The cup?" she managed. He nodded slowly, eyes lingering on door 708 with something close to fear. His hands tightened around the grocery bag. "They always leave one," he whispered. "Who?" Aya's voice cracked. He swallowed hard. "The ones who lived here before." Aya stared. "Before? What do you mean?" He hesitated, looking down the hall as if making sure they weren't being watched. "This floor was sealed once, long time ago. After something happened. But the landlord reopened it without telling anyone." Aya felt the walls lean in closer. "But the ones who died here," he glanced at the offering again, "they never left." Before she could reply, he walked past her quickly, as though finishing the conversation might invite something listening nearby. Aya looked again at the offering bowl. The tea was still. Too still. Almost like it was waiting. She reported door 708 to the building management that afternoon. She shouldn't have. The woman at the front desk, middle-aged with tired eyes behind thick glasses, frowned at her description. "There is no door 708, she said flatly. Aya insisted. The woman sighed loudly, stood up, and walked with Aya all the way to the elevator. "Come, I'll show you." They stepped out on the 7th floor. 708 waited at the end, plain as day. Aya pointed. "There, do you see?" The management woman stopped walking. Her face paled. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at the door as though seeing a corpse they had once buried themselves. "You said this wasn't here?" Aya whispered. The woman swallowed audibly. Sweat gathered at her forehead. "This door," she murmured. "It was sealed years ago." Her hands shook as she reached into her pocket for a set of keys Aya had never seen anyone carry. Thick, rusted, old-fashioned keys meant for doors that no longer existed. The woman approached 708 carefully, the way someone might approach a coffin they had once buried themselves. She inserted one key, turned it. Nothing. She tried another. Still nothing. "They changed it," she whispered. Then, quietly, she added, "Or someone changed it for them." She backed away abruptly. "Stay away from this door," she said, voice trembling. "Do not knock, do not touch it. And if you hear anything at all, you go inside your apartment and you do not open your door until morning." Aya swallowed. Her throat felt sandpaper dry. "What happened in that room?" she asked. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back into the elevator and pressed the button repeatedly, as if the hallway might grab her if she stayed 1 second longer. The doors closed. The elevator hummed downward. Aya was alone again. Alone with the 8th door. That night, she did not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt someone standing on the other side of her door, her real door, 702, breathing quietly, waiting quietly. At 3:09 a.m., the hallway was silent. At 3:11 a.m., her apartment lights flickered. At 3:13 a.m., she heard it. A soft knock. Not on her door. On 7:08. Knock, knock, slow, measured. Then a whisper. A voice, low, muffled, calling a name. Her name. Aya. Her blood iced. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stop herself from breathing too loudly. The voice continued. Aya. Open. Another knock. Softer, more pleading. She closed her eyes and prayed she hadn't heard correctly, but she had. And the worst part? The voice didn't sound unfamiliar. It sounded like her own voice. It began as it always did, with silence. The kind of silence that clung to the walls like mold, sticky and suffocating, where even time seemed to slow its breath. Aya lay awake on her couch, eyes open, watching the ceiling fan turn slowly above her. The clock ticked softly, each second scraping louder than the last. 3:12 a.m. 1 minute left. Her body was still, but her mind was thrashing. Every shadow felt closer than it should be, every sound sharper. Her ears had begun to anticipate something, some rhythm the world had hidden from the living. She didn't know when exactly she started dreading the hour between 3 and 4, only that it had become the most fragile part of the night, a time when the veil between one reality and another thinned. The clock shifted. 3:13 a.m. The exact moment. The lights in her apartment flickered just once, a short pulse, like a breath inhaled and held. Then, footsteps. Not inside, not yet. Outside her apartment. Soft, measured, walking the corridor. Aya held her breath. One step, then another, then a pause, then a knock, but not on her door, on 7:08. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then another knock, more frantic. Someone was visiting 7:08 at 3:13 a.m. Her fingers gripped the edge of her blanket, knuckles white. She couldn't move, not out of fear, but out of instinct, like prey that knows not to twitch in tall grass. Then the doorknob to her own apartment twitched. Metal shifted. The chain trembled. She sat upright, barely breathing. Something, or someone, was testing the lock. No knock this time. Just pressure. A subtle scrape of metal on metal. A hand turning, then retreating. Aya stood, slowly, tiptoeing to her front door. She leaned her ear close. On the other side, the corridor was silent again, but not empty. She knew. She could feel it. Something stood between door 708 and hers, watching, waiting, choosing. The silence didn't feel passive anymore. It felt hungry. Morning never felt more unnatural. When sunlight finally poured through the window, it came too soft, too slow, as if the sun itself had hesitated to rise over her building. Aya hadn't slept. She hadn't dared. She brewed a pot of bitter instant coffee, hoping the heat would shake off the cold that had wrapped itself around her bones since the knock. The hallway, when she finally opened her front door, looked unchanged. But something in her chest clenched. The hallway had grown again, slightly longer, by inches, but definitely longer. And this time, the floor tiles past 708 had changed. They were older, cracked, discolored, as if they'd come from another part of the building or another time entirely. Aya stepped outside cautiously, keeping her eyes on the end of the corridor. Where there once had been a blank wall, she now saw, vaguely, a curve. The hallway was turning. It had never turned before. She didn't go to work that day. She called in sick, citing dizziness, which wasn't a lie. She couldn't walk into a hospital full of the dying when she herself was no longer sure she hadn't brought something dead home with her. Instead, she stayed inside, windows closed, curtains drawn, lights off. She read scripture, not because she believed it, but because her mother used to. She thought of visiting a temple, a monk, a priest, but what would she say? There's a hallway in my building that grows longer at night, and it adds doors, and I think something behind one of those doors sounds like me. No one would believe her, not unless they'd heard it too. At noon, she received a knock, not from the hallway, but inside the building on her door. Aya jumped, heart hammering. She approached carefully. Through the peephole, she saw Min, her co-worker from the night shift. She opened the door slowly. "You didn't come in today," he said, brows drawn together. "Are you okay?" Aya nodded once. "Just tired. A bit sick." Min hesitated. "Can I come in?" She looked back into her apartment, then back at him. "Maybe not right now." He nodded awkwardly. "Sure. I live on the 5th floor. I've seen weird things here too." Aya's breath caught. Min leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your hallway ever feel longer to you?" Her throat dried. She nodded. He looked down the corridor, then back at her. "There's something wrong with this place. I've felt it since I moved in. I tried telling my aunt. She says some buildings are thin places, where the world forgets to close its doors." Aya blinked. "What?" Min shrugged. "You ever hear the expression, buildings with too many dead and not enough prayers?" "No." He glanced behind him nervously. "Neither did I, until I started hearing them." Aya's voice was barely audible. "Them?" He met her eyes. "Whispers at 3:13 a.m. She stepped aside. "Come in." That night, they waited together. They didn't plan to, but neither wanted to be alone. Aya offered him the couch. She sat across from him on the floor, back against the wall. They spoke little. Every so often, one of them glanced at the clock. At 3:10, the air grew heavier. At 3:12, the lights flickered once. At 3:13 a.m., it began. Footsteps. Slow. Shuffling. From somewhere deeper down the corridor. Not near 702. Not even near 708. Further. Beyond. Aya and Mian locked eyes. Then The door handle turned. The chain tugged. Something stood on the other side. Neither of them moved. A long, dragging sound swept past the door, something being pulled across tile, and then, far down the hall, the unmistakable sound of another door opening. I counted 702, 703, 704, 705, 706, 707, 708. Then what? She didn't know. She didn't want to know. The door closed. Then silence. When the clock read 3:21 a.m., the tension broke. Mian exhaled sharply. Aya's body ached from stillness. They said nothing, but they both knew now. The corridor was growing, and it had more than just 8 doors. Aya used to believe that dreams ended when you woke up, but now she wasn't sure the waking world was any less unreal. For 3 nights in a row, she saw her, a woman dressed in white, silent, still, not moving, yet never gone. The first time was in a dream, or what Aya thought was a dream. She had been standing in the corridor, barefoot, the tiles cold beneath her feet. The lights were dimmer than usual, humming softly above her. And at the very end, past 708, past what should have been the wall, a woman in a nurse's uniform stood beneath the final light. White cap, pale dress, stockings the color of bone. She wasn't facing Aya. She stood with her back turned, staring into the wall. Aya called out, but no voice came. The second time, she wasn't dreaming. It happened in the stairwell. Aya had started taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Something about the flicker of the lift's overhead right made her uneasy, like she wasn't alone inside, even when no one stood beside her. The stairwell was less comforting than she expected. Too many quiet echoes, too much damp, and a mirror at the landing between each floor, which she never remembered being there before. As she climbed to the 7th floor, she glanced at the mirror instinctively. She stopped breathing. In the glass, she saw herself as expected. But behind her, reflected in the corner of the staircase just below, stood the nurse in white, still, expressionless, watching her. Aya spun around, no one there. She looked back at the mirror, empty now. Only her, only silence, only the sound of her own breath. She told Min that night. They sat by the window, the curtains drawn tight. The hallway light buzzed outside like an insect caught in a jar. "She doesn't move," Aya whispered. "The woman," Min nodded. "Yes, she just stands there." He didn't laugh. He didn't question. He only leaned forward and said, "I've seen her too." That made Aya shiver. "Where?" she asked. "In the reflection of the vending machine near the lobby." Aya's stomach turned. "She looks like she's waiting," she murmured. Min didn't respond right away. Finally he said, "Maybe she's not waiting. Maybe she's remembering." That night, Aya didn't plan to sleep, but exhaustion was a thief. It took her without permission. She found herself back in the corridor again. This time she stood not in front of her door, but directly in front of door 708. The hallway was longer than ever, at least 10 doors now stretching off into an impossible curve. And there, standing at the very end, beneath the furthest light, was the nurse in white. Only this time, she had turned around. She faced Aya. Her face was blurred, not grotesque, not bloody, just undefined, like someone had smudged her identity from memory. But her eyes were clear, black, still, endless. They locked with Aya's. They didn't blink. The nurse lifted one hand slowly and pointed at door 708. Aya woke gasping, her lungs burning. The clock beside her read 3:13 a.m. Of course it did. She stumbled out of bed, trembling, barefoot again. She didn't remember getting up, didn't remember walking toward her front door, but her hand was on the knob now, turning it, unlocking it, opening it. The hallway outside was dimmer than it should be, longer. She could barely see the end of it. Door 708 stood silently down the corridor just as it always did now, but something else was there. A folded piece of paper on the floor beneath her doormat. Aya crouched, picked it up. It wasn't a note, it was a photograph, an old one, faded and yellowed. In the photo, 3 nurses stood outside what looked like a hospital ward. They wore old uniforms, 1950s maybe. One of them stood slightly apart from the others. The nurse in white. Same uniform, same cap, same stillness. And beneath the photo, a note written in blue ink read, Tien-An Hospital, South Wing, discontinued 1972. Aya dropped the photo like it burned. She backed into her apartment, and as she did, she looked up once more. The nurse in white stood outside door 709. There was no door 709 yesterday. Aya hadn't even noticed it appear. But now it was there, and so was she. The next morning, Aya went to the archives. Not official archives, just a dusty corner of the local library where old municipal records went to die. She searched for Tien-An Hospital. There it was, closed in 1972. The South Wing condemned after a fire in the surgical block. 5 deaths, 3 nurses, 2 patients. Photos were grainy, but one image taken before the fire matched the photo she had found. Aya leaned in. There she was, the nurse in white. No name, no caption, no record of employment, but there, staring into the camera like she'd never left. That night, Aya sat in the corridor for the first time. She placed a single cup of cold tea in front of door 709, where the nurse had stood. She lit a single stick of incense. She bowed 3 times. And when she looked up, the hallway felt less angry. Still wrong, still too long, still growing, but less sharp, less hungry. The nurse didn't appear that night, at least not outside, but in her dream, she stood next to Aya in silence and placed her hand gently over hers, whispering something Aya could not yet understand. Aya used to think offerings were for the dead, but now she wondered if they were for the living too, for those left behind to endure the silence, for those who stayed after something unspeakable had already happened. It began with a cup of tea. She remembered placing it outside door 709 the night before, the same way she remembered bowing 3 times and watching the incense curl upward into the air, disappearing into a darkness she didn't want to name. But the next morning, when she opened her door again, her offering was gone. In its place was something else. A thin square of rice paper, folded into a boat. Aya bent down, careful not to step forward. The paper felt dry, delicate, burnt at the edges. Inside the tiny boat sat three things: a grain of uncooked rice, a rusted sewing needle, and a white hair. Her skin prickled. She set it down gently, as if returning a gesture, and when she looked down the corridor again, she realized she wasn't alone. Each door now had something in front of it. Not mats, not shoes, offerings. At door 703, someone had left a bowl of uncooked rice, half spilled across the tile as though dropped by shaking hands. At door 705, a faded photo, two people in black funeral clothes, their faces scratched out. Door 706 had a child's toy, a wooden spinning top broken at the edge, its string missing. Door 707 had nothing. Aya looked closer. No offering, just a long, thin crack in the tile, as though something had crawled out from beneath the floor. She stepped back. The hallway was longer again. She hadn't noticed before, but now it was obvious. The lights flickered as they stretched further. There were at least 11 doors now. The numbers remained in sequence: 710, 711, but the hallway had begun to curve like a serpent winding through the building's bones. Aya turned toward the new door, 711. At its base sat the most unsettling offering yet: a bowl, not of tea or rice, but of red water. At least, she hoped it was water. Floating inside, a single eyeglass lens, cracked diagonally across the center. The liquid shimmered under the dim light. She stared for a moment too long, and then something inside the bowl moved. A ripple, a shift, as if it had just been disturbed. She backed away fast. That evening, Aya waited for Min to return. He didn't come. She called his number. No answer. Texted. No reply. She went downstairs, asked the security guard if Min had come home the night before. The man just blinked at her. He said, "There's no Min on file here." Aya froze. "What do you mean? He lives on the 5th floor." The guard tapped at the screen again. No one by that name. Aya gave the apartment number. The man squinted. "That unit's been vacant for 6 months." She turned and walked away before she could hear any more. That night, the hallway waited. It always did. Aya opened her door just before 3:13 a.m. The silence was thick, syrupy. The lights dimmed to a sickly yellow. And the offerings had changed again. More now. Different. Sharper. Outside door 710 sat a bundle of black thread soaked in oil. Door 711 had an old key wrapped in red silk. Door 712, newly appeared, had nothing in front of it. But as Aya approached, she heard something behind it. Breathing, shallow, wet, too close to the crack beneath the door. She crouched slowly, and from the gap beneath the door, a hand reached out. Thin, wrinkled, trembling. It held something. Not for her, not threatening, just extending a small metal tag. Hospital issue, bent and scorched, engraved with a name she couldn't quite read. Aya took a step back. The hand dropped the tag, slid back into the darkness. The door never opened. The tag clattered softly onto the floor. Aya didn't touch it. She just stood there, alone in the ever-growing hallway. The corridor curved now so far she couldn't see the end anymore. It was becoming a circle, or a loop, a hallway that would one day fold in on itself completely, a ring of forgotten doors, each one holding something someone had tried to forget. And in front of each door, an offering, a warning, a whisper. Aya felt it in her chest now. Not fear, not quite. Recognition. She was part of this now. The offerings weren't for visitors. They were for the hallway itself. And the hallway was hungry. When she turned to go back inside her apartment, she found something waiting on her doormat. A bundle of dried lavender, tied with hospital gauze. Aya stared at it, then picked it up, slowly, reverently. She understood. Someone had left her a message. You are still alive, but not for long. There was something about silence that changed after someone vanished. Aya noticed it first in the elevator. It stopped coming to her floor. No matter how many times she pressed the button, no matter how many times she waited, it would skip past her, rising to 8, 9, even 10, but never stopping at 7. As if her floor had become invisible. Or worse, unwelcome. So she began taking the stairs again, but the stairwell no longer looked the same. The mirrors had multiplied, not just one on each landing now, but 2, then 3, then one with a long crack down the center, warping her reflection into something hunched and unfamiliar. And sometimes, when she climbed, she passed a floor that shouldn't be there. Floor 7A. No door, no window, just a long sealed wall of concrete and a faint sound behind it. Breathing, slow and deliberate. Like someone had been bricked in, alive. She never paused there, never looked for long. She just climbed faster. The building had begun to shift, not violently, but subtly, the kind of change that happened beneath the skin, unnoticed, until it was too late. People were disappearing, not loudly, not with screams, just fading, gone from elevators, from mailboxes, from memory. She knocked on door 708 one evening. An old woman had lived there, always sweeping her doorstep, always burning incense. Aya had wanted to ask her about the offerings, but no one answered. The door was slightly open. Inside, dark, dusty, empty, as though no one had lived there in years. Yet a pair of shoes still waited neatly by the door. A pair of slippers, one of them covered in ash. Aya backed away, quietly shut the door. That same night, the hallway added another unit. Door 713. Each new door had a feeling to it now, like it had cost something to appear. Aya stopped going to work. No one called. No one asked. Not her supervisor, not her co-workers, not men. It was as if the world outside had slowly turned its gaze away. Or perhaps the hallway had swallowed her timeline. Each morning she woke up later. The sun looked duller through her window. The sky turned gray more quickly than it used to. The birds no longer sang. And every night, at exactly 3:13 a.m., The hallway stretched again. It no longer waited for her to open the door. Now the corridor reached in. She found pieces of it on her floor. Dust from tiles she hadn't stepped on. A smudge of red along the baseboard. A folded paper boat sitting on her windowsill, damp from condensation. She hadn't opened the window. One morning, she walked into the hallway and found something she wasn't prepared for. A door that was breathing. The newest one. It pulsed. Not visibly, but with sound. A low thrum, like a lung under pressure. Like something inside was pressing to get out, but not quite ready. In front of the door, instead of an offering, was a bite mark. In the concrete, a human jaw, teeth pressed hard enough to leave the shape of molars in the wall. Aya reached out to touch it. It was warm. She pulled her hand back instantly. Behind the door, something laughed. That night, she tried something different. She opened door 708. It creaked, slowly, reluctantly. Inside, there was no apartment, only a hallway, longer than it should be. No ceiling light, just walls of gray tile, wet and sweating. And far at the end, a figure, small, sitting on the ground. Aya stepped in. The air was heavier here. Each breath took effort. The floor creaked beneath her feet, not from age, but from hollowness, like something crawled beneath it, following her steps. She moved closer to the figure. It was a woman, thin, shaking, dressed in a hospital gown, skin pale as candle wax. Her head lifted slowly. Aya gasped. It was herself. Older, emptier, lips cracked, eyes hollow. The figure opened her mouth, and in Aya's own voice, it whispered, "You never left. You only forgot." Aya stumbled backward. The hallway behind her was gone, only walls now, endless. And then she saw the others, more versions of herself, dozens, each in different stages of decay, crouching in corners, whispering things she couldn't hear. She screamed. Aya woke on the floor of her own apartment. The door still open. The hallway outside stretched far, curving now like a maze. She crawled to her front door, slammed it shut, locked all 3 locks, and slumped against the door. Behind her, the apartment lights flickered. The air buzzed. Then something tapped from the inside of her closet. Once, then silence. The corridor no longer waited outside her home. It had begun eating through the walls. Aya always believed names gave the dead peace. Now she wasn't so sure, because the hallway was full of those who had none, and they were not at peace. She didn't sleep anymore, not in the way she used to. Her body would collapse for hours, but her mind wandered elsewhere, into the corridor, into the doors that kept appearing, and the rooms behind them. They weren't rooms, really, not in the normal sense. They were moments, held too long. The first one appeared behind door 715. She didn't remember opening it. One moment she was holding a cup of cold tea. The next, she stood inside a room filled with hundreds of photographs. They were taped to the walls, layered atop each other, curling for moisture. Each one was blurred, not from age, but from absence. No faces, just outlines. Children, women, old men, all standing before buildings, at temples, at funerals. But every face had been erased, smudged, scratched, or simply never formed. Aya stepped closer. Each photo had a name written beneath in faded pencil. But they weren't real names, only placeholders. Unit 5C, girl from 6th floor, old man with the cane, unclaimed, unremembered, unknown. The room buzzed with silence, like it held 1,000 whispers too faint to hear. Aya turned to leave, but the door was gone. Only another photograph where the door should have been. Her, standing in the hallway, face already beginning to blur. She ran, down the corridor that now stretched sideways. She passed door 716, 717, each one breathing, each one listening. She stopped outside door 718. The number was scrawled in charcoal directly on the wall. No metal plate, no frame, as if the door had been burned away and replaced with shadow. She stepped inside. This room was cold, bitter, heavy, like breath held underwater. Inside were beds, hospital beds, lined in rows, each one covered in a white sheet. She counted them. 7. Each bed had a toe tag. Each tag was blank. Not a single name, just a time of death. All identical. 3:13 a.m. She turned. The nurse in white stood behind her, expressionless, still, but this time she was crying. Black tears dripped from her eyes onto the floor, hissing softly as they hit tile. Aya tried to speak, but the room swallowed sound. The nurse walked past her slowly, to each bed, and placed a folded paper boat on every chest. 7 boats, 7 deaths, 7 forgotten names. When the nurse reached the 7th bed, she stopped, turned, and in a soft voice, not older, not younger, but like a prayer without language, she whispered, "They stayed too long. They were never called back." Then the lights went out. Aya woke up in her bathtub, fully clothed. The water was cold, her fingers were wrinkled, but she didn't remember turning the faucet on. She stood, trembling, dripping across the tiles to the mirror. On the steamed glass, something had been written. Write their names. But she didn't know them. She never had. That night, she brought a notebook into the hallway. She sat cross-legged near door 717, incense burning beside her, a candle shielding her from the weight of the dark. And she listened, really listened. Each creak, each footstep, each whisper in the wall. She wrote down whatever she could catch, snippets of sound, a girl's laugh, a man coughing, someone humming an old lullaby. She wrote what she could, and for every page she filled, the hallway grew quieter, not peaceful, just less hungry. For now. By dawn, the candle had melted into wax on her lap, but the door behind her, 717, was slightly open now. Inside sat a single item, a name tag, hospital style, bent, burnt at the corner, but readable. Nurse A. Duyen. She hadn't seen it before, hadn't recognized it, until she looked into the mirror beside the door and saw herself wearing the name tag already. The 7th floor had always felt old, but Aya never realized how ancient it truly was, how many layers of existence lay hidden behind the wallpaper, beneath the tiles, inside the silent, stale air that moved like breath. That morning, she discovered the truth by accident. The wallpaper behind her shoe rack had started to peel, just a corner, just enough to catch her attention. At first, she thought it was dampness. The building constantly smelled of it. Old concrete, old air, old water lingering in pipes that hadn't been replaced in decades. But when she reached down and tugged gently, something unexpected happened. The wallpaper came off in a single heavy sheet, revealing a wooden surface beneath it. Not a wall, a door. A door completely sealed, covered, decorated, and forgotten. Aya froze. The wood was old, dark, heavy, with brass studs lining the edges and dust gathering in thick layers along the bottom. Above it, faint from age, was a painted symbol, a circle. Inside it, a character. Wang, to forget. Her throat tightened. Her fingers shook as she brushed away the grime. Beneath the dust, a metal plate, a unit number, 701. Aya stepped back. Her apartment was not Unit 702. She wasn't sure anymore if she wanted to know what lay behind the sealed door, but the building seemed to decide for her. As she touched the metal plate, the floor beneath her vibrated softly. A long, slow breath exhaled from the bones of the structure. And somewhere deep in the walls, she heard movement. More than movement. Someone walking behind the hidden wood, dragging their feet, slowly, reluctantly, as though awakened after too many years asleep. Aya staggered back, heart thrashing. The door vibrated once, softly like a pulse, and a whisper seeped through the wood. "Let me back." Aya ran. She didn't stop until she reached the far end of the hallway, where the corridor now bent sharply, forming a new corner that should not exist at all. The walls here looked different, darker, more stained, as if they had lived a separate life before being forced into this one. Aya's breath slowed. And for the first time, she noticed something she should have seen long ago. The numbers on the doors no longer made sense. 708, 709, 710, 711, 712. No sequence, just fragments, memories, echoes. As if the building placed each door where its death had occurred, not where an architect had designed it. Aya approached door 713. Something was different about this one. The wooden frame around it had been smashed, not recently, years ago. The splinters were softened by time, the edges rounded, like the remnants of a violent act no one had ever cleaned up properly. Yet behind that old destruction, a faint glow pulsed along the edge of the door. She touched the handle. Cold, then softer, warmer, alive. A sudden dread spread through her chest. She turned the handle. The door swung inward soundlessly. Inside was a room with no furniture. Just a single object in the center of the floor. A large bound ledger, covered in ash. Aya knelt and brushed it gently. The binding cracked from age. She opened the first page. A list of names, handwritten. Dozens of them. Some crossed out, some rewritten, some repeated over and over as if someone had forgotten they had already recorded them once. At the top of the page, Resident Registry, Tien An Complex, 7th floor, original. Her breath caught. She flipped through the pages quickly. There were hundreds of names, all of them scratched out. Every page, every line erased by someone frantic or afraid. Her throat tightened. Then, on the final page, she froze. There were only 2 entries left unmarked. One was faded, nearly unreadable. Nurse A. Duen, deceased, unclaimed. The second entry made her blood run cold, because the handwriting was fresh, not decades old. Fresh. Written in black ink, as if someone had added it only days ago. Aya, pending. She dropped the book. The sound echoed too loudly in the empty room. Dust lifted into the air, and when it settled, the nurse in white stood in the doorway. Not outside, not far. Inside, with Aya. Her eyes were dark and endless, and she spoke for the first time in a voice that didn't echo, but absorbed the air around it. You were meant to leave. I didn't know. You stayed. You stayed too long. Her fingers lifted, pointing toward the ledger. Aya shook her head. No, this isn't my name. Someone else wrote this. You wrote it. The nurse stepped closer. Aya stepped back. The nurse's voice softened. It is not death that claims you, Aya. It is forgetting. The room darkened. The walls vibrated. From somewhere above them, dust rained down like ash. And behind the nurse, the doorframe stretched wider. The hallway was growing again, hungry, reaching. The nurse placed a cold hand on Aya's wrist. You must remember, she whispered, before the corridor takes the rest. Aya tried to speak, tried to pull away, tried to deny, but the hallway's breath swept in through the open door, swallowing the edges of the room. And just before everything dissolved into darkness, Aya heard the nurse whisper one final truth. You were never the first, and you will not be the last. It started with a stain. A thin, dark smear trailing out from beneath door 713. Aya noticed it just after midnight. At first glance, it looked like rust, common in old buildings, a symptom of decades of neglect. But this was no rust. She crouched beside it, squinting under the hallway's pale, flickering light. It was blood, thick, black-red, dried at the edges, fresh at the center, and it was spreading, not rapidly, but deliberately, like ink from an unseen pen, slowly scripting something across the floor tile. She leaned in closer. It wasn't random. It was forming shapes, symbols, curves, crescents, jagged spirals intersecting with boxy characters she couldn't recognize. She reached out with trembling fingers just to confirm it was real. The moment her skin neared the blood, the lights above her pulsed, and the symbol nearest her hand glowed faintly, just for a moment. Aya recoiled. The blood was warm. She stumbled backward toward her door, breath hitching. Then she saw it. At the far end of the hallway, where the corridor now turned hard left, a figure was standing. Tall, still. Not the nurse. Someone else. Something else. Its head tilted slowly, as if sensing her. Its arms long and unmoving at its sides. Its presence wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't passive either. It simply watched. Aya backed into her door, key already in hand. She fumbled, twisted, shoved it open, and slammed the door shut behind her. Then silence. She stood there for minutes, listening, but the hallway did not follow her in. In the morning, she opened the door again. The blood was still there, but the figure was gone. She crouched again. The symbols had multiplied overnight. Dozens now, snaking along the floor, curling up the edges of the walls. They were deliberate, measured, like some kind of language or a spell. Aya took a photo with her phone, but the image refused to save. She tried again. Nothing. Her phone vibrated once. The screen glitched, then went black. When it came back on, the background image had changed. A photo, taken from the hallway, of her, sleeping, from behind the chain-link door of her apartment. She hadn't taken it. She hadn't posted it. No timestamp, no metadata, just the image. She dropped her phone. Her hand trembled. Her body shook. Something was watching her, documenting her, waiting. She went to the building management office again. The front desk was empty. No staff, no sound. Only a single sheet of paper pinned on the corkboard. It was a floor plan, outdated, crumpled, but clear. There was no 7th floor. Not anymore. Only a notation. Floor sealed due to loss of structural integrity and fatal fire, 1972. Her breath caught. She scanned the rest of the document and found something worse. A name, scrawled in red ink along the margin, almost like a correction. Not in handwriting, but printed in block letters, perfectly typed, freshly added. Aya, entry complete. Occupant accepted. She turned around. The hallway behind her was empty, but the building had grown quieter, thicker, like a throat preparing to swallow. That night, she walked the hallway alone. No incense, no offerings, no candle, only the dim pulse of fluorescent light that had begun to mimic a heartbeat. The blood trail had reached door 715. It formed a perfect circle beneath the door. Aya stood in front of it, waiting, listening. A sound echoed from inside. Water, dripping, then gurgling, then voices, dozens of voices, all chanting in a language that sounded like breath and rust and old metal. Aya reached for the handle. It turned easily. The door creaked open. Inside, a bathroom, tiled, industrial, old, mold growing in the corners. A single sink, a single mirror, a single drain in the center of the floor. Water pooled around it, black, thick, and from the drain, something moved. A hand, pale, slender, wet. It reached up slowly, grasping for something just out of reach. Then another hand, then a face, eyes milky white, mouth sewn shut, hair floating as if underwater. Aya didn't scream. She couldn't. She was transfixed, because behind that face she saw more. A queue of the forgotten, waiting beneath the floor, pressed shoulder to shoulder, each holding something in their hands, a photograph, a key, a rosary, a broken ID tag, a notebook with her name in it. Each face turned upward, toward her, and in silent chorus they whispered into her bones, "You live where we drowned. You sleep where we choked. You walk where we were buried. And now you remember." The drain pulled back. The voices fell. The face vanished. Only blood remained, slowly circling the drain like ink spiraling down a sink. Aya stepped back, closed the door, locked it, marked the wall with chalk. "Do not open again." Back in her apartment, she poured herself a glass of water and noticed something inside the cup. A single tooth, white, child-sized, floating, waiting. She dropped the glass. The tooth clinked on the tile. She did not pick it up. The doors had always been numbered. Aya took comfort in that at first. No matter how twisted the corridor became, no matter how many turns it added, how many shadows it stretched, each door still had a number, a sequence, a system. It gave her something to hold on to, a fragile belief that the hallway still obeyed some logic. Until it didn't. Until the night she found the door without a number. It appeared after 3 nights of silence. 3 full nights without movement, without blood, without offerings, without the nurse. Just Aya, alone, listening to the hallway breathe. And then, on the 4th night, she stepped outside and saw it. Tucked between 7:15 and 7:16, a door where no door had ever been, identical in shape and color to the others, but blank. No gold digits, no scratches, no peephole, just smooth, silent wood, and a faint scent. Dust, lavender, something burned. She stood before it for several minutes. The corridor was quieter than usual, as though the hallway itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to touch it, to open it. Aya reached out slowly. The knob was cold, too cold. She hesitated, and then turned it. It opened without resistance, and she froze, because on the other side was her apartment. Not an imitation, not a dream. Her apartment. Same floor tiles, same hallway, same couch, same wall clock, same chipped mug on the table. But something was wrong, off. The light was dimmer, thickened somehow, like sunlight filtered through grave dust. And the air was still, no breeze, no sound, as if time had stopped inside. Aya stepped through slowly, heart thudding against her ribs. She looked around. Everything was the same, but covered in a thin layer of dust. heavy, undisturbed. The couch cushions sagged, unused. The sink was bone dry. Even the fridge hummed faintly, but it was empty. She walked into the bedroom. Her bed was neatly made. A photograph stood on the nightstand. She picked it up, and her hand trembled. It was a photo of herself, asleep, wearing the same clothes she had on now. But the photo was old, sepia-toned, faded at the edges, the corners curled. Beneath it, a note had been written in looping, unfamiliar handwriting. She was quiet. She stayed too long. She belongs to the walls now. Aya dropped the frame. It shattered on the floor, silent, no echo. She turned to leave, but the hallway behind her was gone. Only more apartment, the same hallway, repeating, like a loop playing over and over in a place without time. She ran forward past the bathroom, the kitchen, the couch, then again and again. Each doorway opened to the same apartment, a mirror of the last, dustier, darker, until at last she found herself sitting on the couch, still, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, motionless, dead, but peaceful. Aya staggered backward. The figure on the couch exhaled, a soft sound, as if waking. The eyes opened, black, bottomless, and the voice came not from the mouth, but from the walls around her. You cannot leave the place you never left. Aya opened her eyes. She was in her own apartment, or she thought she was. Her mouth was dry, her fingers trembling. She ran to the door, flung it open. The corridor was there, back to normal, mostly, except the unnumbered door was gone, as if it had never existed. Only a faint outline on the wall remained, like bruised plaster. And a single item rested on her doormat, a photograph of her, sitting on the couch, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, peaceful, still. She turned it over. On the back, a date. Tomorrow. That afternoon, she knocked on every door. 7:13, 7:14, 7:15. No answer. She tried to ride the elevator again. Still broken. She tried to call anyone. Her phone had no signal. She turned on the radio. White noise. She screamed, and the building swallowed the sound. At midnight, she walked the hallway one more time, searching for something, anything. And there, far down the corridor, stood a child, alone, holding a candle in one hand, a toy in the other. Aya approached slowly. The child did not look up, did not speak, just placed the candle at the base of the wall exactly where the unnumbered door had been, then turned and walked through the wall, not into it, through it, like mist folding into mist. Aya touched the wall after him. It was solid, cold, unmoving, but her palm came back, wet. She returned to her apartment, sat on the couch, held the photo, the one that claimed she was already gone, and for the first time in days, she cried, not from fear, but from knowing, deep inside, that the hallway wasn't hunting her. It was preparing her. For what? She wasn't sure, but she knew this. The door without a number wasn't gone. It was just waiting for her to forget it again.
Aya had always marked time by her night shifts, meals missed, patience lost,
hours blurred by artificial light and soft footsteps across linoleum. But now, time had stopped making sense. Or rather, it had begun to fold. There were hours missing, entire moments gone. At first, it was small. She would light incense at midnight and blink, only to find it burned to ash at her feet. She would place her keys on the kitchen table and later find them in her hand, already at the door. But then, she began waking in the hallway. The first time, she opened her eyes on the cold tile just outside door 714. Her feet were bare. There was dust on her arms. Her hair was wet. A lit candle stood beside her, burning silently, a flame that hadn't gone out. She looked down. In her lap was a small notebook, its pages covered in writing, her own handwriting. Dozens of pages, names, offerings, rituals. She didn't remember writing any of it. She turned to the final page. It read, "Tonight, I walked past the last door." She closed the book, looked down the hallway, and for the first time saw that the corridor now curved fully back onto itself, a perfect loop, no ends, just door after door. And the space between them felt tighter now, as if the walls were slowly squeezing inward. The second time, she woke standing, outside door 720. She had never seen 720 before. In her hand, a piece of red string tied into a noose. Her other hand held an old coin, blackened with age. She dropped both without thinking and ran. The hallway didn't fight her, but it didn't let her go either. Every turn she made only led her to a different door, some numbered, some blank, some whispering. She stopped keeping time, stopped eating, stopped trying to call out, because every time she opened her mouth now, the words felt distant, as if spoken from someone else's throat. Her voice echoed strangely, too slow, too far behind, too familiar. One morning she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself, not completely. Her face was hers, but her eyes were the eyes of the nurse in white. Calm, empty, patient. She found chalk marks on the walls, circles, triangles, names she didn't know, dates that had not yet come. Some scratched out, others repeated over and over, across walls, door frames, even on her ceiling. She tried to clean them away, but when she wiped one away, another appeared on her wrist, a perfect circle drawn in ash. That night, she dreamed of the nurse again. Only this time, she wasn't standing in the hallway. She was sitting on Aya's couch, drinking tea, waiting. She smiled as Aya approached, spoke in her voice. "I'm just borrowing this. You won't need it much longer." Aya woke up with a mouthful of ash, not metaphorically, actual ash on her tongue, between her teeth. She spat into the sink. Black streaks swirled down the drain, and from somewhere in her apartment, a voice whispered, "You've been here before." She started keeping track, again, wrote dates on the wall in red ink, tallied the nights, watched them smear. The ink never stayed where she wrote it. Some mornings her tally marks appeared across the hallway walls instead. Other mornings, on her bed sheets. One time, on her face, mirrored backward, as if written from the inside. She looked into her notebook again. The handwriting wasn't hers anymore. It was cleaner, sharper, unforgiving. One entry read, "Aya is no longer required." Another read, "The corridor will remember." And another, "Give her voice back to the dead." She stopped opening the door at 3:13 a.m., but the corridor came anyway. sometimes as a knock, sometimes as a whisper. Sometimes she would blink and find herself already in it, barefoot, notebook in hand, scratching symbols into the floor she didn't understand. She saw herself reflected in door glass, in mirrors, in puddles of blood, but always delayed. Her reflection would turn a second too late, smile when she didn't, blink when she hadn't. And once, one horrible time, it reached out of the mirror and touched the side of her face. She screamed. No sound came out, only dust. Her voice was no longer hers, and the hallway had begun using it. She heard it whispering to others, calling them out of their rooms. Open. It's safe. You're dreaming. Come this way. She banged on doors, tried to warn them, but no one opened. And when she finally stood before one of the new doors, 721, she heard her own voice whispering through the keyhole. Soft, pleading. Please help me. I'm trapped. She stumbled back. The voice followed her. Please, I'm Aya. I'm alive. Let me in. She covered her ears. The voice kept coming. Later, she found a note on her doormat, folded, burned at the edges. Inside, a single line written in her own handwriting. You are the corridor now. She didn't sleep after that, didn't try, because when she closed her eyes now, she felt other eyes close with her, all across the hallway. And when she breathed, she felt dozens of lungs exhale through unseen doors. The corridor wasn't haunted, it wasn't cursed, it was inhabited, not by ghosts, but by those who had been forgotten so completely they became part of the walls, and she was becoming one of them.
The corridor had been twisting for days or weeks. Aya no longer trusted time. It drifted around her like dust motes in stale air, weightless, directionless, caught in some current she could not see. She stopped counting nights, stopped checking the clock, until the night the clock forced her to. It was almost 3:13 a.m. when the lights in her apartment flickered in a pattern that felt familiar. 2 short pulses, then darkness, then the long cold hum she had come to dread. She already knew what it meant. Another door had appeared, and this one was special because when she opened her apartment door, slowly, reluctantly, the hallway was completely still. No flickering lights, no new offerings, no extension, just utter stillness, as if the corridor were holding its breath. And then she saw it. Far down the curved hallway, at the place where shadows gathered like water at the bottom of a well, a new door stood. Not numbered, not blank, marked only by a single line of text scrawled neatly across the wood in chalk white strokes. Room 313. Aya shivered. A door named after a time was wrong, too precise, too deliberate, as though the corridor itself were giving her a destination, a final one. She walked slowly, each step echoing slightly out of sync, as though she were walking alongside herself, or ahead of herself, or behind. The air thickened around her with every foot of distance closed. The door grew larger, darker, heavier. Something deep inside her ribs began to ache, the feeling of crossing a threshold she could never return from. When she finally reached it, she placed her fingertips on the door. It was warm. alive. She turned the handle. It clicked softly and opened. The room was pitch black. Not dim, not shadowed. Black. The kind of darkness that had weight, like velvet soaked in oil and draped over her eyes. She stepped inside automatically, though she didn't feel her feet move. The door closed behind her with a gentle click. Then the darkness shifted, softly, breathing. Then a whisper came, not from in front of her, but from everywhere, like wind through a corridor of open mouths. "We have been waiting." Aya froze. Another whisper joined it, and another. Voices layered atop one another, thin as paper, fragile as dust. Dozens, then hundreds, a soft storm swirling around her. She tried to speak. Only dust escaped her throat. A faint shimmer appeared in the dark, like a floating ember, like a dying spark from incense. Then another, then a second. Together they glowed faintly until Aya could make out the outline of a figure sitting on the floor, its knees drawn close, its head bowed, its hands clasped together. The light dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. Aya approached. Closer, closer still, and the figure lifted its head. Aya's breath stopped. It was Min. Pale, eyes hollow, skin thin as old fabric stretched over bone. He exhaled a faint cloud of dust. "Aya," he whispered, but his voice didn't move his lips. It escaped through the air beside him. She crouched beside him, trembling. "You're alive." He shook his head softly. "No, not anymore." The sparklight flickered. He lifted his hand and placed something into hers. A small wooden tag, burnt at the edges, her name scratched into it. Aya. Room assignment, 313. She swallowed against the tightening in her chest. "What is this?" "A room, a place, a memory." "I don't want it." "It doesn't matter." His eyes lifted to the darkness. "Once the corridor remembers you, your room is made." Her hand shook. "Then why are you here?" He took a slow, heavy breath, dust drifting from his lungs. "I tried to leave. You can't. You can only return." "Return where?" Min pointed into the deeper darkness. The shadows shifted. Shapes emerged. People sitting, lying down, standing. Hundreds, unmoving, all facing her, all empty-eyed, all dusted in the same gray stillness. Min leaned in close. Everyone who ever lived on this floor, everyone who was forgotten, everyone the corridor reclaimed. Aya stepped back. "No, I can't stay here." "You already have. You just didn't realize it yet." The door behind her opened, just a crack. Enough light seeped in to illuminate the edges of the room. Enough to show the people on the floor turn their heads, creaking, slow as one. Looking at her. Waiting. Min's voice echoed faintly. "Your room is ready." Aya ran. She didn't look into the darkness, didn't look back at the people, didn't look at men. She sprinted toward the thin line of light around the doorframe, heart pounding so fast it sounded like footsteps behind her. She burst into the hallway and slammed the door behind her. The moment it shut, the numbers faded into the wood. Room 313 vanished. The door was blank. No handle. Sealed flush with the wall. Gone. Her lungs burned. Her hand shook so violently she dropped the tag Min had given her. It clattered to the floor. Split in two. Inside the crack of the wooden tag was something soft, something white, a strand of her own hair. She stepped away, but the hallway shifted, breathing, and far down the corridor, far beyond where the curve should have ended, a new door appeared. A door with her name carved neatly across the wood. Not Aya, not Nurse A. Juin, not an apartment number, but something far older. Her original name, written in characters she hadn't read in years. Why? To remember. Her hands went cold, her vision blurred. Because she suddenly understood. The corridor was not trying to take her. It was trying to restore her to what she had been, to where she had come from, to the place she had already died long before she ever moved into Thienan Complex. A soft voice echoed down the hall. Come home. Aya backed into her apartment, closed the door, locked it, turned off the lights, sat on the floor, shaking. Because she knew. Tomorrow night, the door with her name would still be there. And she didn't know how many more she could walk past before one opened.
The photo still sat on her table, the one she had found in the false version of her apartment. The one of her, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, still and silent. She stared at it for hours, as if watching it long enough might make it change, blink, breathe, speak. It didn't. But she heard the voice behind it, soft, low, patient, the voice she thought belonged to someone else, to the woman in white, to the nurse who watched her from doorways and reflections, who left offerings, who never spoke until she spoke in Aya's voice. But now Aya understood. The voice had always been hers. She hadn't worked at the hospital in over a week, maybe longer. She hadn't received a call. No one knocked. No one asked where she had gone, as though her absence were expected, accepted, absorbed, like everything else in the hallway. Aya stood in front of the mirror. The chalk circle had returned to her wrist, but this time, inside it, drawn in thin lines of red ink, was a number, 1072. She didn't recognize it, but she would. The building's basement had always been locked, a rusted gate, a do not enter sign barely clinging to the door, mold crusted in the corners, air that reeked of soaked cloth and forgotten years. But tonight it was open, the lock broken, the gate unlatched, the stairs downward lit by flickering bulbs that pulsed like old lungs. Aya walked slowly, each step hummed under her feet, like memory awakening. At the bottom, the air grew cold, sharp, surgical, and the tiles changed from modern white ceramic to green hospital flooring. Familiar, too familiar. She stepped into the hallway. It wasn't the building's basement, it was a hospital ward. Old, condemned. And on the wall near the nurses' station, she saw it. A staff photo, yellowed with age. 5 people, 3 nurses, 2 doctors. One of them stood apart. Straight posture, white dress, eyes shadowed. Aya leaned closer. The face was hers. Not similar, not familiar, hers, smiling slightly, holding a clipboard, and beneath it, a name. A. Diyun. Aya staggered back. The hallway pulsed. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. And from somewhere in the ward, a bell rang once. A temple bell, muffled, distant, but she recognized it. She'd heard it at funerals, at dawn prayers, at hospital memorials. It rang again. Then footsteps, approaching slowly from the ward's end. She turned, and there she was, the nurse in white. No longer a shadow, no longer silent, no longer distant. She walked toward Aya with grace, not floating, not ghostly, just present, human, whole. And when she stopped, she tilted her head, then spoke. "You've come home." Aya's voice shook. "What is this?" The nurse stepped aside, revealing the door behind her. It read 1072, Staff Room, South Wing. Aya stepped closer. The door opened on its own. Inside, dust, filing cabinets, old uniforms, empty beds, and a single chair with a clipboard resting atop it. The clipboard held her personnel file. She picked it up. The ink was faded, but legible. Name: Nayun Duyun Ang. Position: night nurse. Date of disappearance: October 7th, 1972. Last seen: evening shift. Final location: room 313. Aya blinked. That wasn't just a room number. It was the time she always woke up. The time the hallway changed, the time her life began to unspool. She turned back to the nurse, to herself. "I'm already dead, aren't I?" The nurse nodded gently. "No, but you were once." Aya staggered. "What does that mean?" The nurse Diyun smiled softly. "You never left. You came back, not all at once. A memory here, a shadow there, a whisper in the hallway." Aya clutched the clipboard. "But I don't remember this life." "You were taken early. The fire, the south wing, room 313. No one claimed your body, no prayers, no rites. You stayed." "But how did I live again? How did I have another name?" Diyun looked past her into the dark. "The hallway gives form to the forgotten, the ones with no graves, the ones erased." She met Aya's eyes. "You are not a ghost, you are a return." Aya sat on the floor, the corridor above, the hospital below, her memory nowhere. She whispered, "Then what do I do now?" Diyun knelt beside her. "You finish remembering." She handed Aya a mirror. In it, her reflection flickered. One moment, Aya. The next, Diyun. Then Aya again. Then both at once. Then neither. Only eyes, watching. The mirror cracked. A single line across the center. And her reflection smiled. That night, Aya returned to her apartment. She opened every drawer, looked behind every picture frame, pulled up the floorboards, checked the back of the closet. Everywhere she searched, she found evidence of someone who had lived there before her. The same teacup, the same shoes, the same rosary, all aged by decades. As if she had been looping through this place again and again, each time a little different, each time a little closer to remembering, until now, until she was ready, until the corridor was ready to keep her. The next time she passed a mirror, she did not see herself. She saw Diyun walking down the hall in her uniform. Soft steps,
still breath, eyes full of something calm, something ancient. She nodded once toward Aya, then disappeared.
The night was still. Still in a way that made Aya feel like the entire building had stopped breathing. The lights in her apartment no longer flickered. The walls no longer creaked. The whispers had gone silent. But not because they were gone, because they were listening, waiting. The corridor had reached its final shape. No more turns, no more chaos. Just a perfect circle of doors, curved gently around the floor like a ring of memory. Aya stood in the center of it. She no longer counted the doors. She no longer questioned where she began or ended. She had become part of the rhythm now. Each step she took echoed not just forward, but backward, into every other step she had taken before. She lit 3 sticks of incense and placed them outside her apartment door. Not as a ward, not as a plea, but as a greeting. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the hallway breathed. A soft inhale, then silence. Then another door appeared. Seamless, smooth, quiet. Not with force, not with ceremony. Just there. The wall had stretched for it, made space, welcomed it. And on that door, a name. Not hers, not Jean. A new name. Aya walked toward it slowly, footsteps quiet. Her body calm, her skin no longer cold. The door was warm, like memory, like blood. Inside, she found herself, not as a ghost, not as a reflection, just there, standing by the window, watching the dark skyline. She didn't turn when Aya entered. She only said, softly, "I thought I was alone." Aya said nothing. She walked to the couch and sat, and eventually the woman turned. Younger, tired, new. A new nurse. She was holding a small duffel bag. Her ID tag read knock. Fresh out of school, probably on night shift, probably just moved in, probably just tired, like Aya once was. Knock looked around the apartment. "I keep hearing things," she whispered. "But I guess all old buildings are like that." Aya smiled gently. "Only the ones that remember." The clock ticked softly. Knock sat across from her, looked down at the incense, then up at the ceiling. "I saw a door earlier, one I don't remember." Aya nodded. "It happens." "I tried to find it again," Ngok said, "but it was gone." Aya didn't answer. Ngok leaned in. "There's a woman who stands at the end of the hall, sometimes in the mirror, sometimes at the stairs." Aya looked into her eyes. "What does she want?" Ngok asked. Aya smiled. "Not much. Just to see who forgets and who comes home." The lights dimmed. The hallway grew, just by inches, just enough to make room. Aya stood, walked to the door, opened it, and stepped back into the corridor. It welcomed her like a tide welcomes a stone. She passed the new door again, the one with Ngok's name. She would keep an eye on it now. She would watch. She would wait. And when the hallway breathed again, she would be there. The nurse in white, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. In the stillness of 3:13 a.m., a new offering appeared outside her door. A folded paper boat. Inside it, a name she had not yet learned, but would in time. Because the corridor never ends. It bends, it stretches, it forgets, and then it remembers. And somewhere in its silent, curving length, another door is being made right now. Another name written, another life waiting to be folded back into dust, and another nurse one day will step out at 3:13 a.m. and begin again.